Hi students, welcome to chapter 1. In this video I'm going to talk about the origins of the American continent and American society. And so we begin by looking at where the first Americans came from. And we're increasingly confident now that the first Americans, the original inhabitants of the American continent, came from Asia. That there was a point where the North Pacific, which has always been a warmer ocean, was shallower, where the Aleutian Islands that stretch from Alaska towards Asia were part of a more extensive land bridge that enabled nomadic hunters who were pursuing their prey, pursuing herds, to cross over from Asia into North America. And they did this by following the coast that kept them away from the most dangerous glaciers, the most extreme temperatures in northern Canada. It meant that the climate was relatively temperate, and from there they were able to migrate south and spread across what today is the United States. And we refer to this first American culture as Clovis Culture, based off the site in New Mexico, in which we find some of the earliest remains of this culture. And so typically we date this culture back to about 12,000 years BC. And the main evidence that we have from this civilization are the stone knives that the Clovis people used to hunt the mammoths and the mastodons and the buffalo that they used to feed themselves. We even have records that they would sink the bodies of the mammoths and the other animals that they'd killed into icy lakes when they were half-eaten, basically to use them as refrigerators. So they would come back to these lakes when the hunting season wasn't very good or when they weren't able to find anything. And it's pretty cool. So we have this Clovis culture, which is migrating south through the Americas from Asia. That's a nomadic hunter-gatherer culture. And then we have the Neolithic Revolution, the human transition, which occurs roughly around the same time at different points across the globe, and is a transition from human beings as nomadic hunter-gatherers to human beings living in sedentary societies, human beings becoming farmers. And so they live in the same place and they cultivate crops in order to provide themselves with a consistent food supply. And this happened in the Americas, we think, roughly around 7,000 BC. It's around this time that we start to see evidence that after the Paleolithic period, which follows the Ice Age, so you have the Ice Age, you have the melting of the glaciers, a rapid warming of the planet, and great fertility, and then you have a period of cooling as the climate starts to stabilize. This means that you have a growing human population, has to work harder to find its food supply. It means that the very large animals that they hunted, like the mammoths, no longer have a food supply to sustain themselves and become extinct. And so human beings turn towards agriculture. And we find human beings in the Americas. We find remains that suggest the human beings in the Americas are farming potatoes and squash and crops like this to provide this consistent food supply in one particular place. The one very interesting difference between the Neolithic Revolution in the Americas, the Neolithic Revolution in Europe and the Middle East and Asia and Africa, is that in the Americas we don't have a lot of evidence of domestication of animals. In the Americas, this seems to be just the domestication of plants, rather than the domestication of both plants and animals that we see in other areas. Now, the first part of the Americas where we see civilizations emerge after this change is not in North America, but it's in Central America, the part of America that today we know as Mexico. Mexican societies are much more successful, much more quickly than North American societies at establishing farming societies that can support a flourishing civilization. towns, marketplaces, extensive trade, and even written language, which we don't find in North American, Native American life at all. And so we see this in Mexico, first of all, with the Mayan civilization that established cities and established a culture, architectural achievement. And the Mayan civilization seems to disappear around 900. And then we kind of have a period of flux. And then around 1200, we see the rise of the Aztecs, who establish an even larger, even more sophisticated empire with sophisticated art, architecture, with a sophisticated economy. But this is also a society where human sacrifice is prevalent. This is something that's often talked about, but it is important to set this alongside the achievements of the Aztecs. That at the same time as you have the achievements of the Aztecs in the infrastructure of their society, you also have these really shocking rituals where the victim's heart is cut out by a stone knife to be offered to the god, and that these are extensive. We have records of a particular ceremony in which the prisoners to be slaughtered, who are typically virgins and warriors, these were seen as most pleasing to the Aztec gods, that these humans waiting to be sacrificed stood in 4 columns, each column 2 miles long, waiting to be sacrificed. So this wasn't something that was rare or unusual. This was something that was a very established part of this society. Okay, I'm gonna make another video in which I talk about North American tribes, the emergence of the North American tribes.